No one sees you bleeding, but you're at war. And your worst enemy lives in your head. Anxiety, sadness, anguish. They don't scream from the outside, but suffocate you from the inside. And you know the craziest thing? Sometimes the ones smiling at everyone else are the ones silently begging for relief the most. Have you ever felt like your own mind is your biggest battlefield? Have you ever found yourself fighting thoughts you didn't choose? But here's a truth few people have the courage to say. Just because you feel this way doesn't mean you've lost. Not everything that makes you tremble disqualifies you. And maybe, just maybe, what you call weakness is what God will use to heal you. In this video, you'll see that even the great men of the Bible experienced mental crises. People who saw fire fall from the sky, but fell into an emotional hole soon after. People like Elijah, people like me, people like you. If you feel like you're fighting an invisible war and are tired of pretending everything is okay, stay until the end. Because this could be the last time anxiety controls you, and the first time you understand that God is still there, even in the silence. There are times when the mind becomes a battlefield. There's no noise outside, but inside. It's as if chaos screams. Anxiety arrives without knocking, and suddenly the person is trapped in a spiral of thoughts, fear, and dread of what hasn't even happened. It was like that with Elijah, a prophet who had just experienced a massive miracle. Fire literally fell from the sky, but all it took was a threat, a word of opposition for him to want to give up on life. It's like that. Sometimes those who are victorious on the outside are imploding on the inside. Elijah ran, hid in a cave, and begged to die. Consider the weight of this scene. He was overcome by such profound anguish that not even the food from heaven was enough to alleviate it at that moment. This isn't just sadness, it's an invisible war. And the most beautiful thing? God didn't appear with thunder or earthquakes. He revealed himself in a still voice, a whisper. Because sometimes healing begins when the noise stops and the soul finally hears God's whisper in the midst of despair. This isn't poetry, it's a pattern from God. And there are many people today, like Elijah, tired, exhausted, on the run, but from their own minds. The enemy knows that if he dominates your thoughts, he doesn't even need to touch your body. Anxiety, guilt, panic, sadness, all of these begin in the invisible. But it's also in this invisible that God begins to work. He doesn't need fireworks. He heals with silence. And this mental war, it doesn't need to continue. But the first step is understanding that it's not madness, it's an invisible battle. And the way Elijah reacted to this whisper changes everything. After the silence came the voice. Not an ordinary voice, but one that penetrates the soul and undoes the knots of anguish. Elijah heard, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" As if God was saying, "I see you, I know what's inside." This moment is decisive, because when anxiety grips, the mind lies. And often we begin to believe we are alone, forgotten, adrift. But God wasn't distant. He was just waiting for the right moment to speak. And it was in silence that he chose to heal. The curious thing is that even after this encounter, Elijah was still fragile. He didn't leave jumping for joy. He left with a mission. God gave him direction, a path, a new purpose. When the mind is at war, what's most lost is the sense of direction. It seems like everything loses its meaning, doesn't it? But when God speaks, he restores it. He told Elijah exactly what to do, whom to anoint, where to go. This is healing too, when confusion gives way to clarity and anxiety begins to weaken in the face of a voice greater than itself. And here's a powerful detail. God didn't replace Elijah. He didn't discard him because he was weak, anxious, or downcast. He rehabilitated him in the midst of the process. This is contrary to any human logic. Because in God's kingdom, weakness isn't a reason for exclusion, it's an invitation to draw near. If you've ever felt like a failure because you were sad, exhausted, or anxious, remember this. Elijah felt it too. And yet, he was an instrument of miracles. Do you know what this means? That your anxiety isn't the end of the line. It's just the point where God's voice begins to write the next chapter. Elijah didn't just have an encounter, he had a mental realignment. The same mind that wanted to die days before now had a new direction, not because the environment changed, but because he heard what he needed. Sometimes, what a person needs to overcome anxiety is no longer external advice, but a reminder from within. You still have a purpose. When God gave Elijah direction, it wasn't just geographical, it was emotional, spiritual, and mental. It brought structure to a mind that was crumbling. God knew Elijah needed more than words. He needed companionship. And that's when he raised Elisha. This is important, because often relief also comes when we understand that we don't have to face everything alone. Elijah had isolated himself, as if to say, "No one understands me, no one cares." But God, who saw his sadness, brought a journey partner, someone who would walk with him, help him on his mission, and share his burden. This too is healing, leaving isolation and allowing yourself to be helped. And how often do we do the same? We withdraw, we become silent, we bury ourselves in our own thoughts, and wait for someone to guess the depth of the pain. But God doesn't guess. He sees. And often he sends answers in disguise, a person, a video, a word that arrives when the mind is crying out for help. Elijah returned to the path, and even with internal scars he followed, because there was a calling that wasn't cancelled by anxiety. This changes everything. And that's exactly where most of us stumble. There's a silent lie many people believe, that those who experience anxiety lack faith. But that's not true. Elijah was afraid, yes. He felt weak, exhausted, depressed. And yet God didn't say, "Come back when you're better." On the contrary, God spoke to him in the depths of the cave, gave him direction, and even called him to continue. This teaches us something powerful. It's not your emotional state that determines whether God will use you or not. It's your willingness to keep listening. Even if you don't understand everything, anxiety doesn't disqualify anyone. David also had days of profound sadness. Jeremiah wept so much that he became known as the weeping prophet. And Jesus? He sweated blood in Gethsemane. Such was the mental weight he carried. If even the Son of God felt agony in his soul, why do you think feeling it makes you less spiritual? The difference is, what do you do with this pain? If you hide it, it becomes a prison. But if you surrender, it becomes a bridge. And relief begins precisely the moment you stop pretending everything is okay. The problem is that at this point, many people back off. They start to get better and think they need to wait until they're 100% to get back to acting, serving, and living. But the truth, healing is a process, not a button. Elijah returned to the path out of fear. He obeyed, still fragile. And it was in this movement that he found strength again. Perhaps what you're hoping for as complete healing will only come when you take the first steps, because God doesn't call you to be perfect. He calls you to continue. And those who continue discover a secret that almost no one talks about. Most people seek a prayer that will erase their anxiety. But what if God wants to heal you through permanence? Elijah walked again. He continued. Even tired, even with internal scars, even still processing everything he'd experienced. And look, this teaches something rare. Healing isn't just about feeling, it's about continuing. It's in the still that the mind begins to change. Even with anguish, he continued. Even with fear, he trusted. And it was in this still that relief began to become constant. Staying when everything inside you wants to run away is one of the greatest acts of faith, and it's not glamorous. There are days when you'll read the Bible without wanting to, pray without knowing what to say, get out of bed out of stubbornness, But that's when anxiety begins to lose ground, because the anxious mind screams, "Stop!" And the soul, rooted in God, responds, "I'll keep going anyway." It's not about performance, it's about presence. It's about trusting that God sees what no one else sees and is working where no one else touches. And for those who think this is impossible, it's not. Elijah did it. David did it. Jesus, in the midst of anguish, prayed more intensely. Persevering isn't about ignoring the pain. It's about not letting it rule. It's about making faith a routine, even when your heart is racing and your head is full. It's a daily yes to God and a no to the lie that says you won't get better. Because every step you take, even trembling, is an answer that heaven hears. And it's in this silent fidelity that a key turns. The key isn't shouted. It doesn't come with a spectacle. It turns in silence. The moment a person understands that the problem isn't feeling anxious, it's letting anxiety dictate the path. Elijah was still the same man who entered the cave, but when he came out, something was different. It wasn't a change in feelings, it was a change in attitude. He now knew God was there, even in the silence, even when his mind screamed, even when his heart wanted to run away, and that changed everything. This silent key is what many people are missing today. Many people want healing but don't want to continue. They want relief but refuse the process. They want peace but can't stand the silence. But silence was where Elijah heard the voice. And it is in silence, sometimes, that God speaks most. The secret is there. Keep listening, even when the inner noise tells you it's over. It's at that moment that faith ceases to be theory and becomes practice. And those who choose to listen, even in the chaos, begin to see a new kind of strength arise within. This strength isn't euphoria, it's steadfastness. It's not the absence of pain, it's courage in the midst of it. Because the relief God gives isn't just momentary, it restructures the soul. He gives you the resources to carry on, even when everything around you still seems the same. It was that way with Elijah, and it can be that way with you. Anxiety may knock at the door, but now you have the key that makes no noise, but changes everything, hearing his voice above the others. And when that key turns, something new begins to be written in your mind. Did you notice? The war in the mind doesn't end with shouting, but with a silent choice, listening to the right voice. Now tell me, how long will you let anxiety dictate your decisions? How many of God's promises have you paralyzed by believing in fear more than his guidance? Today you saw that even Elijah, a giant of faith, wanted to give up. But God didn't give up on him. And he won't give up on you. So if all this made sense, if something stirred inside you, don't keep it to yourself. Start practicing, choose to stay, and surrender to this process, even if it's slow. Oh, and before you leave, if this message spoke to you, if it was an answer to your soul, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, because here we talk about healing, relief, and faith in a real, direct, and profound way. God has more to give you, and this may be just the first clue.